welcome to the start of another edition of the Roadshow podcast, driven by me, Jack Mortimer, where today we'll be covering all manner of things, really. Got quite a varied show. We're going to start off, as we almost always do, with the latest in motoring news. After that, we will be taking a look at almost identical twins, or at least that's the name of the overall segment. If you hadn't listened to the show when this was a radio show, let me tell you all about that. I'm not talking about twins in the sense that these are cars that are connected to one another. Really, it's just a way for me to talk about various cars that have some history, not enough to fill up a whole segment, but history that still deserves to be told. So specifically, we'll be taking a look at 3 Citroens that never actually made it to production for whatever reason. After that, though, we have got a bit of a special, actually, because we're taking a trip to the Goodwood Revival. The first time I've ever been to the Goodwood Revival. I went on the Saturday a couple of weekends ago, and if you live in Britain, you'll remember that it was absolutely boiling, about 32 degrees. And I didn't, some people dress up for it. I kind of went in a kind of half dressed up. I went with a kind of salmon shirt and a kind of grey, almost checkered trousers. I don't really have too much in the way of 50s attire, but there were people there wearing like tweed suits in the boiling hot weather. Absolutely crazy. Thank goodness there were actually plenty of water taps so you could fill up your bottles and that sort of thing. I got through a lot of that. But I won't be complaining about the heat in the recordings that we've got from there. Instead, I'll be going around the auction that was there. There were some beautiful cars there. And as well as that, rather curiously, the car park, because there was a specific section of the car park for, classic cars. So it did just feel like you were wandering through a car park of the past. So a lot to come on the show today. We really do need to make a start. So why don't we do exactly that by heading over to the newsroom. And of course, we start this week's news section with the story that everyone's been talking about, and that, of course, is the announcement that Rishi Sunak has pushed back plans to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 to 2035. Now, of course, when the plans were originally announced by the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson back in 2017, they were for 2040. However, in subsequent years, got pushed forward 5 and then 10 years, causing some to fear that we wouldn't be prepared with the right infrastructure to support so many electric cars by 2030, as we're speaking about 7 years away. However, whilst fans of the internal combustion engine celebrated the news, many experts in the automotive world are very frustrated, actually, with some calling on the Prime Minister to resign over the issue. Perhaps most notably, the chairperson of Ford, Lisa Branklin, said this week, and this is a quote, "Ford has announced a global $50 billion commitment, to electrification, launching 9 electric vehicles by 2025. Our business needs 3 things from the UK government: ambition, commitment, and consistency. A relaxation of 2030 would undermine all 3. Similarly, the EV campaigner and former Top Gear presenter Quentin Wilson added, and again, another quote, "If the government moves the 2030 deadline, they risk billions in investment and thousands of jobs. Today, car makers, including Ford, have warned that they need policy certainty for future investment decisions in the UK. Moving this date for short-term electoral gain will both risk the entire energy transition and the UK's international, investment credibility." On that note, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders this week published some rather interesting sales figures surrounding electric vehicles. According to the SMMT, EV sales are at a record high here in Britain, with one being sold about every 60 seconds, meaning that they're predicting battery electric vehicles will make up 17.8% of the overall new car market at the end of the year. However, whilst the figures are high, the organisation revealed that only a quarter of people buying new electric cars are private motorists, and that means, of course, 75% are going to fleet buyers. Nonetheless, a survey found that 68% of people who drive fossil fuel-powered cars said that they would like to own an electric car. It's just that they're worried about how they are more expensive to buy, of course, and also take longer to charge than a petrol or a diesel takes to refuel. To help people make the switch, the SMMT are calling on the government to introduce mandates to support the rollout of electric vehicle chargers and also reduce the amount of VAT charged on electric models. Mike Hawes, the chief executive of the SMMT, added, again another quote, "We are entering a new phase in the UK's EV transition in which Britain can and should be a leader. We have the industry, the love of new technology and the scale to succeed." However, it is worth noting that that statement was made before the 2030 mandate was pushed back. In other news, it's been a rather interesting week for Welsh motorists as well, due to the new 20-mile-an-hour speed limit coming into force in built-up areas. Now, I don't think I need to patronise you by saying that it means that in many streets, in many cities, I should say, the speed limit has been lowered by 10 miles an hour, but supposedly doing so, according to the Welsh Government, could save 10 lives a year. However, the change, which has affected about 7,500 miles of road in the country, has cost £32.5 million and given the Welsh Government quite a bit of opposition. A recent poll noted that about 2/3 of Welsh drivers were against the change. What's more, a trial of a similar scheme over in Belfast found that very few motorists actually took notice, still travelling at about 30 and therefore making no real difference to road safety. Mind you, they did find that there were fewer traffic jams, so I suppose it's not all bad news. However, of course, to be more serious, drivers who are found exceeding the speed limit in a new 20 zone will face the same consequences of speeding on any other road, with the RAC warning that UK motorists have a serious problem with compliance. Anyway, let's talk about some new models now, and Peugeot have announced quite a bit of information about the new all-electric version of their 308 hatchback, the fittingly named E308. Like much of the other electric Peugeots, there aren't many changes to the outside, sparing the new badges which have a blue E on them, and that isn't a bad thing considering the bold looks of the 308 with its fang-like lights and the rather intricately patterned grille. Really like the looks of the new Peugeots. Based on the EMP2 platform, the new E308 will feature a 54 kilowatt-hour battery, which features a new kind of chemical composition compared to a lithium-ion battery typically found in most modern EVs, along with a 156 brake horsepower motor which drives the front wheels. Whilst we're not entirely sure just yet on how fast that will make the E308, it will be able to cover a 257-mile range, and it can also charge from 20 to 80% in under 25 minutes if you're using a 100 kilowatt charger. Competing with the likes of the MG4 and the Volkswagen ID.3, the Peugeot E308 isn't going to be the cheapest electric family hatch, with prices starting at £40,050. But if you are prepared to wait for your electric car, ideally about 4 years, you might be interested in knowing the upcoming generation of the BMW M3 is on the way, or at least it will be, in 2027. The first version of the famous model to be fully electric, the styling is very unusual indeed. It's quite a traditional 3-box saloon, but with plenty of sharp angles and massive air intakes on the bumpers and even the rear doors. Rather unusual, that. The headlights are fully LED, 2 bars on either side of the particularly stretched kidney grills, whilst the M3 in particular also gets a light-up version of the 3-colour M Sport logo. But much more interesting than all of that is the way that the M3 will be powered, with BMW announcing a new control system that's called the Heart of Joy. Now, I agree that the name sounds a bit far out, but this is a system that can send power to all 4 wheels when and where it's needed in order to provide ultimate levels of control, torque and grip. Whilst few technical figures have been revealed about how fast, I should say, or how powerful that will make the new M3, an engineer at BMW said that the Heart of Joy will be capable of transporting up to a megawatt of power, and that is, when you translate it, 1,341 brake horsepower. Now, something tells me that you won't necessarily get all of that power in a BMW M3, I should say, at least from the box. But if the idea of that level of power, indeed also the EV owning experience, isn't really for you, many experts have also predicted that BMW will likely sell the current petrol-powered M3 alongside the new EV one, even though the styling doesn't look as good as the electric one, which of course will launch in 2027. And finally, let's talk about something that's not quite worth its weight in gold, but pretty unique and comes at a price. Following on from last week's announcement that Mini are going to make electric cars, of course, in their Cowley factory in Oxford, the coach builder David Brown Automotive has launched an EV version of the original. Called the Mini E-Mastered, see what you did there, the new car looks more or less identical to the 1959 original. The press photos show a two-tone beige and copper example, which curiously features a colour-coded mesh grille, colour-coded flared wheel arches, and a set of, you guessed it, colour-coded wheels as well. I can't say colour-coded, that's weird. What should I say? On the inside, there's a set of brown leather seats. This is really going off the rails, complete with headrests, a wooden steering wheel that looks very classy indeed, and also more modern air vents, even an infotainment screen. As for mechanicals though, well, the Mini E-Mastered features a very lightweight battery weighing just 640 kilograms, and that's connected to a 98 brake horsepower motor. As a result, it's quite a bit more powerful than an A-series engine, that's for sure. The E-Mastered will be able to reach 62 miles an hour, of course that's 100 kilometers an hour, in 8.5 seconds and a top speed of 92 miles an hour. It's hardly the most practical EV in the world, but it does offer a fairly useful range of 110 miles per charge. Sadly though, it's also got a very hefty price tag, and there's no way of me beating around the bush with this one. £125,000, and that's enough to buy a whole collection of petrol-powered minis. And just before you dart off to eBay to take a look at mini prices or car and classic or anything along those lines, may I just remind you about our social media pages for the Roadshow. On Facebook there's actually a group that you can add yourself to, and that is called the Roadshow Dougie Stone Radio. Or if you're more of an Instagrammer, the place to go to is D Stone Roadshow. Of course that's all one word, the letter D followed by Stone Road Show. You can also email us. Our email address is, again of course, all one word here, the roadshow.radio@gmail.com. Now it's time for us to play a game of this. Yes, indeed, folks, it's time for Commercial Quiz Time, the part of the show where I play to you the audio to an automotive advertisement. And what I would like you to do is simply take a listen to the music, if there is music, voiceover, and of course my clues at the end. Try and guess what car is being advertised. So why don't we take a listen to our commercial for this week? And I'll be honest, it's quite an easy one. Wow, no voiceover on that one. Means nothing for me to bleep. However, you know what? Berlin, Take My Breath Away, Car Driving Through Fire. I won't even give you any more tips. I think that is enough for you. If you were around at this period or have an interest in cars or adverts or anything like that, that is a very identifiable one. In fact, I will give you another clue, and this is the really obvious one. The slogan, "The lion goes from strength to strength." If you still haven't got a clue, don't worry, there's no judgment from me. In fact, I'll even let you know the answer, but only at the end of the show. Anyhow, now on the show it's once again time for us to take a look at the weird old world of obscure cars, and specifically ones that didn't quite see the light. Now, if you're a regular listener to the show, you might recall that we did a similar segment a little while back, taking a look at two cars that were proposed and partially developed by British Leyland before budgetary restraints meant that they were shelved and ultimately axed. Well, this week I thought that we might as well do it again, but this time take a look at some of the hidden treasures from my favourite car brand, of course, Citroen. Now, Citroen are very well known for being innovators. Think of the advanced hydropneumatic suspension system of the Citroen DS or the front-wheel drive traction avant. And whilst I could happily spend these 10 or so minutes telling you why a 2CV was actually an incredibly advanced model for the late 1940s, it's safe to say that by the time production ended in 1990, it was pretty stale. However, it wasn't meant to last anywhere near that long in production. Not only did Citroen launch the slightly more upmarket Ami in 1961, in 65 one of their most prominent designers, Robert Apron, was tasked with making something new. The brief was fairly simple: make something 2CV sized, pretty economical to run, and so easy to build that in theory 1,000 of them could be turned out every week. And poised with the launch date of 1969 or so, Opron got to work on something very innovative called the G-Mini. Now, various G-Mini prototypes were made, all different from one another, but there were some unifying features. Most notably was its one-box design, that is to say that the bonnet line was at exactly the same angle as the windscreen, a lot like the Renault Twingo or indeed the later Citroen Zara Picasso. Not only did this maximise space inside, it made it incredibly aerodynamically efficient. It had a drag factor of 0.32, and to put that into perspective on how good that was, it took 20 years for them to better it with the launch of the Citroen AX in 1986. What's more, completely going against the externally mounted headlamps of the 2CV, one of the G-Mini prototypes even had pop-up headlamps. Now, admittedly, it wasn't the first for that. Of course there was the Lotus Elan, but it would have been something very unusual on such a cheap model. Some models also toyed with the idea of having their headlamps behind the windscreen, which I suppose would have made changing the bulbs nice and easy, but made the whole thing look rather, well, odd. Also rather odd was the interior. As I said, it was roomy, and at the time roomier than any other car of its size, but another weird quirk of the G-Mini was that it had a built-in child seat, a rare piece of passenger safety for the 1960s. So why did all of this innovation fail to take off? Well, when Opron showed the model to potential clients, they weren't exactly keen on the idea. Whilst it looks very ahead of its time today, it was so alien in the 1960s it was somewhat off-putting to people currently in something that was technically designed before World War II. However, it wasn't all bad news for Robert Opron, as the G-Mini was kind of reborn in 1969 when the Bureau d'études, basically design office, or study office, worked on another project called the EN101, and as you've probably already worked out, it was heavily based on the G-Mini, designed not as a 2CV replacement, but as a weird kind of challenge to see how much interior space could be offered in a 2CV sized car. And in fact, why don't we actually continue with the theme of Citroen 2CV derivatives as the ones that we never got, because believe it or not, in 1974 there was going to be an upmarket version of the famous tin snail that was a bit of a throwback to the traction Avant of the 1930s. It's easy to forget now, but by the dawn of the 70s the humble 2CV was over 2 decades old and not really the fashion statement it would become later down the line. At a time when petrol was cheap, there wasn't really any need for a funny-looking ultra-economy car. That's why so many drivers upgraded to a Diane or moved over to the fashionable Renault 4. Well, rather than replace the model completely, someone at Citroen decided to stir up some interest by launching what I believe was going to be a special edition of the 2CV, called the 2CV Super. A lot like the Ami Super, it would forego the wheezy 602cc engine for a more powerful 1-litre unit taken from the GS, and that would raise the power levels from 32 to 55 brake horsepower. But there was a bit of an issue with this idea. The 1015cc engine simply didn't fit under the bonnet of the 2CV, and don't forget that when it was first released in the 1940s, it was meant to have a 375cc engine. The upshot was the 2CV Super needed a new front end, and given a recent trend for nostalgia, Citroen decided to elongate the bonnet to give the Deux Chevaux a vertical grille, along with 2 large chevrons that you would find on the Traction Avant. The headlamps were also brought forward, sleeker wings were fitted, and a larger, dare I say safer, bumper was added too. And that wasn't all. To make it more luxurious, at least like in 1970s standards, make it more like a Lincoln Continental, a vinyl roof was fitted with pieces of trim where the rear quarter lights would typically go, and there was even a spare wheel mounted to the boot with a little plaque on top for your number plate to go in. This really was a 2CV like no other. And it still is, because to my knowledge only one was ever made. Whether the company decided that it would be too expensive to make or the public weren't so keen, I'm not entirely sure why this one was canned, but the oil crisis of the 1970s very quickly revitalised interest in the basic model, which was soon refreshed to come in vibrant colours like bamboo green and canary yellow. And from 1976, it was of course also offered in special editions, although not quite extensive as those. But to show you that not all prototypes that Citroen scrapped were in some way related to the 2CV, the last model that we're going to talk about today is the ill-fated replacement for the CX. Like many of Citroen's luxury models, the CX had a very long life, being built from 1974 all the way up until 1991. However, work on its replacement actually began just 6 years after the model's launch in 1980, when the aforementioned Bureau d'Etudes finished working on the BX and found themselves with nothing really to do. And I'm not just saying that to be cute, the Bureau began working on the CX replacement project without any official confirmation or request from the head of the company, Xavier Karcher. You see, the late 70s and early 80s were a bit of a funny time for Citroen. After being bought out by Peugeot to form PSA, their cars would share a lot of the same technology and, quite frankly, be much less quirky than they once were in a bid to increase sales. Many feared that the CX, which was the last car to be launched before the company was taken over, would be the last true Citroen, the last quirky Citroen, but the replacement, which was known internally as Project E, was going to disprove that myth. Like the CX, Project E was going to be quite a sleek, almost coupe-like luxury car. However, when the CX was a saloon with a small boot lid, Project E would have a split tailgate, a bit like a Range Rover, and that would make it much more practical for carrying bulky loads. Around the front, it was clear that the Bureau wanted to create a family look across the range, using a lot of the same design elements from the BX, such as tucking the grille underneath the front number plate to streamline the bonnet, and the very boxy headlamps next to much smaller square indicators. I'd love to tell you that what it was like on the inside as well, but sadly, I simply can't. There are seemingly no photos of the interior. In fact, I've actually only encountered 3 images of the car that were taken back in, I assume, 1980. You see, when one of the high-ups at PSA discovered that the car was being worked on, they were told to stop it at once, with the prototype completely being destroyed and a great deal more work coming from Peugeot's design team in the future. And that is the very sad ending to our look at 3 Citroens that never actually saw the light of day. Now, I will admit that some of the cars that we talked about today didn't really get too far in their production, but each and every one of them did have the potential to sell to the public, and if they did, they would be incredibly notable today. I mean, if you think about how collectible the Citroen Ami Super is, the 2CV Super with a different front end, people would go mad over that. But of course, there are many reasons why such things cannot happen, and I suppose we do just need to be grateful for what we did get. Anyway, now here on the show, it's time for us to take a trip to, of course, a massive classic car show, and one that I've never been to before, Goodwood Revival 2023. Alright then, you'll have to excuse the Willy Wonka in the background. They are viewing that in a kind of drive-through cinema. However, we are here at the Goodwood Revival. I don't really have a massive amount of time today, but I thought I would give you a quick look around at some of the cars that are for sale at the Bonham's Cars auction stand. And stand is a bit of an under-exaggeration. There is a lot of cars here. A lot of really beautiful cars, actually. Looking at a Morris Mini Minor, really early one it seems, certainly pre-dated registrations, so certainly, pre-1963, absolutely gorgeous. It has I'd say 70s radio, but everything else feels very period correct for it. A little clip-on mirror, because of course they didn't come with any door mirrors, and wing mirrors actually. If a standard Mini Minor isn't really to your taste, there are some Austin Coopers as well, probably Cooper S's. Well, the red and black one certainly is. It's also got a full-size cloth sunroof, which is absolutely lovely. And yes, this one was done by Radford Coach Builders. You would find that a lot of Mini Cooper S's were converted by coach builders. and it looks absolutely stunning. It's a 1966 model. Actually, it says Downton on the back, which I think was another company that did conversions and sort of tuning kits and all of that kind of stuff. The other one on the back is, well, first things first, the other one is oak green and Old English white, and it has a little sticker on the back that says Castrol winner European Rally Championship. But what if a Mini isn't quite large enough for your taste? Well, how about this for large? It's a Mercedes Pullman, a 600. This was the biggest one that you could get, owned by a lot of leaders, or certainly drove a lot of leaders round. Some reputable, some not so reputable. Absolutely. Well, what else can you say about it? It's massive. They've got curtains in the back, just in case the person being chauffeured round wants a bit of privacy. Walnuts everywhere, chrome everywhere else. You've even got some vents in the back, which of course you would get in a lot of modern cars these days. However, back then, that was quite special. Next to that, we've also got another Mercedes, a 1966 Mercedes. Is this an SEL? I'm never actually that good when it comes to, yes, an SL. 230 SL to be exact. Never really too clued up about Mercedes when it comes to their sports cars. Usually I'm more focused in on the standard saloon cars, that sort of thing. What else do we know? Plenty of Jaguars, it has to be said. Of course there are Jaguar E-types. Always are. This one is a pale yellow H-Reg model, 1969 or so. Once again, we've got the clip-on door mirrors. Radio aerial, I think, mounted to the rear view mirror. I don't exactly know if that's the case. However, of course, this is a soft top, so you couldn't really mount it to the roof. Otherwise, you'd have to fold away the radio aerial every time you wanted to, put the roof down. And on a day like today, you really do want to put the roof down. It's about 30 degrees. So let's go into the shade, I think. There are a pair of very, very early Land Rovers here. Land Rovers celebrating their 75th anniversary this year. How do you tell a really early Series 1 Land Rover from just a plain old early one? Well, the first 2 years of production, the models had the headlights behind the grille, so they were kind of covered over. There is also a later one here with the the uncovered headlamps, I suppose you would say. These pair of the pair that we've got, there's three actually, but the first pair, I should say, are your standard soft tops, collapsing windscreen, very, very basic indeed in pretty much every regard. 1.6 litre engine, of course. We also have another early one, but this one has probably been some sort of underwent some kind of coach building. It is a station wagon version, fully hardtop, and two bench seats in the back. Very similar actually to what would become the Defender 110s. However, of course, this is, I think it was an 80-inch wheelbase on these, and then an 86 later on with the Series 2. I might have to correct myself there. There you go. So this gives you a little bit more information, this sign here. So one of them is just a 1948 Land Rover, so a very early one. The other one, with the chassis number 86002, is the second Land Rover ever built, and that could be yours here at the show. I dread to think how much that would cost. Now, of course, a lot of the models here compared to the Silverstone Festival's auction are performance-based. A lot of Aston Martins, as I'm sure you can imagine, one of which is a Aston Martin DB5, a lot like James Bond had. How about this for something performance-y, however, not necessarily that much power, very light. An MG, what were these, the MG TF? I believe they were, certainly the T-Series, pre-war, although I do think they made a few in the late 40s. Beautiful condition, as they all are here. You've got your wider wheels, really. Well, I suppose this would be before ponton styling, actually. Very, very low-strung doors, suicide doors, actually, rear opening. What else do we have here? Well, this is an Aston Martin, but I am terrible when it comes to these. Give me a Hillman Minx, I know quite a bit about what I'm talking about. Let's see if we can get any information on this. It's a DB2. If I were to have read the number plate at the front, I would have known that, because this one is LDB2. Two-tone, dark green and pale green. Again, really, really nice, that. You don't have to go all the way back for some of these cars to the 50s, 60s, or even in the case of that MG, the 30s or 40s. We have the 1970s Alfa Sud TI here, fuel injected, back when that was certainly a very, very big bragging point. But this isn't just any old Alfa Sud, a kind of Citroen GS sized car, quite similar to the GS in a few ways actually, as well as the obvious styling. There was a boxer engine, rather unusual suspension system, although of course on the Alfa not hydropneumatic, about 1 litre to 1.2 as well on the entry level ones. This one though is a lot more competitive than that. Actually, it was a competitor at Motorsports UK earlier on this year. It's got a full-on roll cage, racing seats installed. The rest of the interior has been stripped out. It's black with various sort of Italian flair on the side of it. Of course, red, white and green stripe. And even a little advert for Gold Seal Salmon, which makes me think that this actually was used to race back in the 1970s. Very odd sponsor for motorsport though, has to be said. This is going to go down well. I am talking about a thing that I actually have no knowledge of whatsoever. It's a sports car, kind of two-seater roadster, looks very 1940s in design, and it's a Ford. It clearly isn't a sort of replica because it's still on sort of pre-1963 number plates, sadly without a catalogue. I don't know that much about this. I'm going to have to chime in from the studio, I believe. And after a lot of searching, I was able to find out what on earth it was by actually looking at the Bonham's auction catalogue. It's a 1932, so older than I thought, Ford Sport called a Bissell Special, and apparently it had an estimate of between £30,000 and £40,000. I don't know if it sold at auction or how much so, if it did. However, I can tell you a few other cars and the prices that they went for. That Land Rover that I was telling you about, the oldest, well, the second one off the production line, sold for £109,250. And if you're wondering, there was also a Royal Review vehicle, Burgundy, kind of open top, and that sold for £86,250. Another 53 Land Rover, I should say. Lancia Delta Integrale, of course, a very, very famous Group B rally car, that sold for £41,400. And if you even wanted just a humble little Mini, 1962 Morris Mini Minor Saloon, that sold for £11,500. Blimey. But let's have a look and see if we can find something I do know about. There is a James Bond car here, a black Defender 110, of course a new shape Defender. Whether or not this one was used in the latest film, I do not know actually. I know that they did use a lot of pre-production models of the Defender because when they filmed it, the Defender wasn't out yet in its new guise. Now though, of course they are rather common sights, but it's cool to get one with a bit of history. Back in the early days of touring car racing, British cars were used a lot, and just standard British cars, and this is a perfect example of one. A 1956 Austin A50 Cambridge competition saloon, almost a competitive saloon. It's that as well, I suppose. It's sadly not an original, it seems. However, it was turned into one in 2007 and then updated between 2018 and 2023, so that's a 5-year process, of course. It certainly looks the part, actually. It's Old English white and black, with, again, a full roll cage, racing seat, all of that kind of stuff. I doubt it would just have a standard 1500 B series under the bonnet, but I'm not entirely sure. But if you really do not like the idea of motorsport for whatever reason, here's something for you. It's a Morris van. I would say a Morris 8 van, although I was going to say a Series E. This doesn't look like a Series E because it has externally mounted headlamps, but it is a Royal Mail van. Very, very authentic to what they would have had in the 1940s, maybe early 50s as well. Amazing lock on the back of this, actually, which has a massive bar, actually, making sure that both doors don't swing open as it's going along and thousands of letters fly out in a sort of comedic matter. That is rather cool. Okay, and finally, if you want something very, very unusual indeed, this is really for you, and this is something that I swear I've seen before, however I cannot find out what it is. I'm actually going to have a look at this. It looks very Tatra-y, however it's not a Tatra, because by this point in the 1940s 40s, 50s, they would have been under communist rule, wouldn't have been able to make cars like this. However, it's got a massive tail fin at the back, rear-engined, probably air-cooled as well, I would say. Suicide doors on the front, regulars on the back. Of course, that was very much so the style of the time. But to actually find out what it is for, I am going to have to look this up, which is a terrible ending to our look at the auction at the Goodwood Revival. But what a place. And joke's on me on two accounts, because A, that was a Tatra, pre-war Tatra actually, or I say pre-war, I think it was slightly after the war, 1945 Tatra. And that's not not the end of the recordings from Goodwood or even the auction section, because we've also got this. Brief epilogue for weird vehicles up for auction. There's also an AEC Routemaster bus, a proper double-decker from the 50s or 60s. Actually, we do have a bit of information on this one. It's not a Routemaster, it's a Regent, which was the predecessor, manufactured in 1952. It was last in service in 1970, so this has been in private collections for a very long time. It was on loan to the museum in this year actually, so I don't know whether this one is actually for auction or just here for display purposes. However, it's once again in beautiful condition. Got advertising on the side for Pan Am, Washington, daily non-stop jets, if you're interested in that. I'm assuming that would have been more in the late 60s, early 70s than in the early 50s. That would have been very, very something indeed. But really wonderful. I even love the seats on there actually. You think about 1950s buses as being like very thin, horrible vinyl. However, these are cloth in brown, a light green, red and black. And it doesn't sound as if it works, but it does kind of work. There we go. Later on that day, amongst other things, I had a wander around the car park of Goodwood Revival 2023, specifically the section where everyone that rocked up in classic cars went. So why don't we take a listen to that? Because you've been very good, I thought I might as well have a quick wander around some of the classic cars that are here on display. This seems to be very much so a kind of run what you've brung sort of affair of visitors bringing kind of classic cars, particularly from the 50s and 60s. And actually a very surprising amount of French cars. There was a French Vauxhall Victor I could see there, a French Triumph, is that a TR5 or TR4A? I don't really know. I'm never really that good with the sporty cars, as you well know. This one is a TR4A, so slightly earlier. Don't ask me to tell you what year it is because of the French number plates. We've also got a TR6 next to it actually, which is also on French plates. They must have come down in convoy. Jaguar Mark 9 as well. Let's talk about something decidedly British. A Rover P4 here, B-Reg 1964. This would have been one of the very last ones, and it's in a kind of dark grey, greeny colour. Two-tone actually, and black. Really, really nice inside. Walnut dashboard, very, very sit-up and beg. I would imagine they look rather dated compared to the your typical Rover 2000 of the time. However, I suppose, would they have been a bit more powerful? Not entirely sure on that actually. Ford Anglia here, also a B-Reg 1964. This one looks like an Anglia Deluxe. It is white and dark blue. Not only does it have a dark blue roof, it also has a flash down either side of it. It's a Super Anglia, or an Anglia Super, with the 1.2 litre, wouldn't be a cross-flow, just a Kent engine from the original Cortina. That is absolutely gorgeous. Frog Eye Sprite next to there, light blue, a lot of them were, and also, just in case any of this stuff that I'm talking about now is a bit too new for you, an Austin 7 as well, which is actually for sale, £8,500 open to sensible offers if you want a 1937 Austin 7 Mark II, a Ruby as it is. Oh, and that's a lovely sound, a Citroen 2CV, a very early one actually, I would have said late 50s. So, 10 years into the production run, but the production run went on so long that it doesn't really matter. That still is rather early in the grand scheme of things. Looking over there, looking yonder as it is, I think I saw a later 2CV actually. I'll wander in that direction. So much other stuff to talk about actually. In fact, this seems to be a bit more of the general car park, because there are a few modern cars dotted about here and there. I don't think the Hyundai Ioniq is a particularly classic car. However, the Morris Minor next to it is called Jenny. Smoke grey, I believe that is. Jaguar E-Type behind, and indeed is a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. The small one, that's on German number plates. God, people travel far and wide to get to this show, don't they? We've got a Pageant Blue Triumph Dolomite over there. I can see a Mercedes W123 estate. This is just absolutely incredible. I didn't realise that it was going to be like this, but it is just row upon row upon row upon row of classic cars. It is a bit like, I said this at Festival of the Unexceptional, but particularly because the crowds are actually at the show, it is walking through a car park in the 1960s. Datsun 240Z there, which is actually badged as a fair lady, which makes me think it's an imported one. Left-hand drive as well, actually. Citroen H-Van, this is W-Reg 1981, it's for sale. So if you're thinking about starting up a coffee shop, this is the vehicle for you. Another Morris Minor, now this one, I think I've actually seen this one in the past. G-Reg 1968 or so, so quite late in the day for a Minor. However, it is black with a red stripe. It looks absolutely divine, that. There is the 2CV that I was talking about earlier on. It's, say, Parisian blue, I think is what they called it, or tropical blue. It's on Swiss number plates this time, so gone very, very far in a car of just 602 cc's. Next to that, we've also got a lime flower coloured Morris Minor Traveller. This was when they were trying to make the Morris Minor Traveller a bit more trendy in its later days, so they painted it in some snazzy colours from the Marina, and you will never hear the words lime flower and snazzy again in the same sentence. Oh, Mark 1 Escort going past. That's very nice. Another amazing Citroen that's come from afar, it is a German Citroen CX, a Series 1 CX actually, with the chrome bumpers. I don't actually know again how old this one is. It's got the plastic mirrors on it, so I would say probably a turn of the 80s, maybe early 80s actually. They continued to make the Series 1s up until 1985 when they started to phase it out with the version with the plastic bumpers. Really nice condition again, actually. It's a sort of metallic-y, almost turquoise colour, mostly blue though. Also a Citroen DS Decapotable, a Palace one, and you can always tell early Palaces apart from the rest of the range because they had sort of front fog lamps that were mounted externally, a bit like 2CV headlamps actually, onto the wings. There's another 2CV, another DS there actually, another Palace one, funnily enough, also Dutch. It's amazing to see how many foreign classic cars are here. It's wonderful. I thought I might just go on a bit of a rapid fire thing just as I'm walking around. The only reason that I'm going to do this is because it is very hot. It's the middle of the day, very much so midday sun, and we know who goes out in that. So just on my journey to some shade, let's talk about some of the cars that are here. We have, of course, plenty of MGBs. An MGB GT, quite a late one actually, R-Reg 1976, equally R-Reg, a sand glow coloured Mini Clubman, a Mini Clubman saloon actually, with brown interior. That is actually quite nice, I have to admit. Got the latches open on the windows, the rear windows that is, just to let some of the heat out. Belgian Rolls-Royce, I think that is a Silver Shadow. After looking at that Mini, it looks absolutely massive. Well, indeed they were. Silver Shadow 2, which I think had a better steering setup. As I seem to recall, they weren't that good at going around corners, first of all, because, you know, 2.2 tons. Got a Renault 4 over there, actually, an F-Reg one, so quite a late one, 1987, 88, actually. Or 89 perhaps. It's a Renault 4 TL, imported, because I think they stopped importing them here 86. So possibly, you know, French, Spanish, Italian. Let's see if we can find out anything about this. I've actually got two posters, one in English, one in French. It lived in Italy, a multicultural car, it says. It's got a 950cc, a 956cc engine, 24 brake horsepower, 0 to 60 in 23.4 seconds. That's quite something. Another classic Mini Cooper S. There again, same colour scheme as the one that was up for auction, a oak green and old English white. example. Another Land Rover, actually, that looks like a Series 2A, maybe even an early Series 3, being 1969. Why don't we take a look at a Triumph Herald G-Reg, so 69 again, 68 perhaps. By this point it would have really been effectively replaced by the new Triumph 1300, used the body of course from the Dolomite, but still selling very well, so they kept it in production until about 1971, about the same time that they axed the Morris Minor, and this is another example of one in burgundy this time. In fact, actually it's got quite a few substantial improvements to the interior, very much so bucket seats which the Minor wouldn't have had, with headrests, or at least in the front. Just to round off this part of the look, here is a K-Reg 1971-1972 Fiat 500, bright yellow it is, very very nice, and actually even on a day like today the flies aren't enjoying this one. Usually you have that horrible thing where your car is covered in flies if it's a bright colour, but not this example. Black vinyl seats though, I would not want to get into that thing after today. A few more cars from the look around. We have a Talbot Horizon. I didn't expect to see. No, it's not. It's a Sunbeam. Wow. So the Sunbeam was the replacement. Oh my goodness. Hang on. I'll tell you about that in a moment. The Talbot Sunbeam was the replacement for the Hillman Imp, and it was made in Linwood. I have a feeling they actually shared... No, they couldn't have shared that much, really, because of course this is front engine, front wheel drive. The Imp of course was rear engined. This was actually a hatchback, which I think was the first Chrysler product to have it, you know, as a super mini, competing with stuff like the Fiesta and the Chevette and the Polo and all of that kind of stuff. The reason why I acted so surprised was because of the dealer sticker on the back. Arbury Service Station, Nuneaton Road, Bulkington, Warwickshire. So really near to where I live. I had no clue that there was a Talbot dealer there. So, in fact, I do know exactly where that is. That is now a Peugeot Citroen dealer, which makes sense because, of course, Talbot was bought out, I should say, really. In fact, it wasn't. Chrysler Europe was bought by Peugeot for something ludicrous like £1, and they turned it into a subsidiary called Talbot. They sold these cars. After a while, they found that it wasn't really doing so well, so they kind of rounded it all up and into Peugeot. So the Peugeot 309 was, well, if they hadn't have done that, would have been called the Talbot Arizona. Which is rather interesting. Also interesting is this. It is a Mark II Cortina like no other. It's a Crayford convertible one. Now, back in the day, Ford would really only manufacture their cars, maybe not so for the Cortina, but for other cars in their range, just as a standard saloon. You know, you get some trim levels, you get like a deluxe version, but that was pretty much it. And then other coach builders would modify cars upon request to turn them into all sorts of things, estate cars, and indeed convertibles as we see here, or at least as you can hear here. Now this one is based on a 1600 GT, so you know, quite substantial in the range actually, and it had plenty of GT badging on there, 4 auxiliary dials, even a little trunk on the boot for, I don't know, any kind of extra storage purposes. We have a very modified looking Ford Anglia here, a Ford Anglia 100E, the flat roof if you will, and it's in Gulf colours, a lot like a Ford GT40. I wonder if it has a GT40 engine. Of course that wouldn't fit really, but hopefully it has something a little bit more substantial than your standard, what was it, an 1172cc side valve engine. Also, you know, more up my street here, a Vauxhall Viva 1300 GLS pale yellow. It's an estates version, which was a rather unusual thing actually, because the estates for the Vivas were almost coupe-like. They were kind of proto-hatchbacks. I quite like it actually, and it's got the Firenze front end with 4 headlamps. Very nice, that. And with that, I'm afraid we come to the end of our programme today. Just before we go, though, why don't we take a listen to the commercial, our mystery commercial once again, just in case you've forgotten about it or you missed it the first time round. And of course, it was for the Peugeot 405. Very well done if you got that. As I said, a very memorable advert from 1989. I'm afraid at that is where we have to finish our drive for today. I have been your driver, Jack Mortimer. Thank you ever so much for listening. Hope you'll be able to join us next week, where, among other things, we will be, of course, taking a look at the latest motoring news and continuing our story about the Hillman Imp. Until next time, thank you for listening once again, and drive safely. Bye now.